You'd ask anybody that ever met Grandpa. He was a straight shooter. I mean, he wasn't rude by any means, but he told you what was on his mind. He was fast. Couldn't keep up with him when he was walking. He always took time for his employees. He knew everybody's name. He always went out and shook their hands. And I think that was another great quality, that he never felt like he was bigger than them. He knew they all were the only reason he was able to be successful. He never cut corners. He always just did things right. And, he was just an all-around good man and did what he said he was going to do.
You know, it started at the dinner table conversations between my grandparents and my dad and uncles, and that's really where the values of business and family were passed on. And a lot of the takeaways, it's all the sayings that my grandfather had, like your word is your bond, your reputation is the only thing you can take with you when you go. All that stuff was instilled in us, you know, our whole life, just hearing that.
You get up early, you work hard, and you go back and do it tomorrow. I think Kinsley Construction is successful today because of the foresight that my father had in a very early stage of his construction company, or even as the leader of the family. He has always been the type of guy that wanted everybody around him to succeed, and he could see the vision of what it took to grow a company. And until the day he passed, he said there's only one thing you die with, and that's your reputation. So he empowered his people to make the decisions, and as he grew, the people within the company grew. And he always said, if you don't grow your business, you never grow your people. So I think that philosophy is what kept Kinsley Construction to where it is today.
The Kinsleys are a family of builders, both literally and figuratively. What started with one man, his wife, and 5 sons, has become a nationally recognized construction company with one mission: construction done right. Since 1963, their hard work and dedication helped build a successful business, strong communities, and a legacy that will last for generations. Back in 1963, the population of York County was growing, and the construction industry was booming. It was a time of growth and opportunity, and at the center of it all were Bob and Ann. Having already achieved success running multiple businesses, Bob and Ann decided to combine their efforts and form one company, Robert A. Kinsley, Contractor. Their new company didn't waste any time making a name for itself. It quickly became a powerhouse in the York area, taking on a diverse array of projects, from landscaping, excavation, and site grading, to home construction and remodeling. It was a remarkable journey, and just another step towards the future of Kinsley Construction.
Dad had a passion for building houses. I think a lot of that comes from when he first got in business, and he was a residential, built some small houses, and I think he even built his very first house that Pat was born in.
Meanwhile, Bob and Ann transitioned from their first home in Dallastown, Pennsylvania, to a 19th century bank barn in Jacobus, Pennsylvania. This historic property eventually became both their family home and the center of Bob's flourishing construction business.
Yeah, my memory growing up is that there wasn't a lot of distinction between family and business. It was all put together. You know, the house we grew up in backed right up against the growing construction company, right? You walked out of our yard and that was where the equipment was parked. That's where the material sheds were.
During this time, it wasn't just the business that was growing. The Kinsley family was too. Bob and Ann raised their 5 sons, Patrick, Jonathan, Christopher, Timothy, and Robert II, on the family farm and business property. The boys grew up next to the construction yard and quickly learned business fundamentals from their parents.
So for us growing up, it was very integrated. You know, as I said, for a while it was literally run out of the house, then it was running next to the house. And my dad was happy to have us learn the whole way along. So it was not unusual that sitting around the dinner table, he was talking to my mom about the things that were going on that day and what was happening in the company. So we were sort of absorbing it all along.
And I just think the fact that the life that Dad gave us, or the opportunities as young kids, you know, took us to where we are today.
By the late 1960s, Bob's business grew to new heights. Projects grew larger and more frequent, and by December 1967, Bob incorporated the company as Robert A. Kinsley Incorporated. It was a clear statement. Nothing was going to slow him down. In the 1970s, the business faced significant challenges. Bob aimed to grow the company into a multi-million-dollar enterprise, but encountered resistance from the bank. This adversity fueled Bob's ambition, as he realized that the company could be better and that big changes were required for Robert A. Kinsley Incorporated to reach its true potential.
He was just a visionary. He would see things and say, this is going to be the next thing, and I'm going to figure out how to do it, and he did it. After a while, he realized that you can't live all year long on putting in lawns and doing that sort of work, so he said, I have to have something else. So then he decided concrete work was the next thing. So he had a friend from Dallas town who knew how to do that, so he hired Norby Riedel, and they started doing concrete work.
Bob spent the bulk of his time out on the jobs, running the backhoe, supervising pours, delivering fuel, picking up timesheets, and dropping off paychecks.
A lot of people will say, you know, that Dad raised the business and my mom raised the family. But what that's missing is she was doing double time because she was also working in the business. So she was doing both. You know, early on, she was the accounting department in the very beginning. And even as we were growing up, now obviously we'd gotten older, we're in school more often, she was coming in and working on a regular basis, you know, continuing to do business work, both accounting and management work. So she was doing both.
At a certain point, you know, after the boys were, you know, little kids and I was doing the book work, it was a question of either we had to hire a nanny or we had to hire somebody to do book work. And so I chose to go home with the kids.
At the time, Kinsley was still a relatively small business with less than 50 employees. The need for help grew, so Bob eventually hired friends he knew he could trust to help take on office work like estimating and bookkeeping, and then later on, field operations. Just as Robert A. Kinsley Incorporated was scaling up, the economy was winding down. An inflation-fueled recession, coupled with the oil crisis in 1974, caused worldwide food shortages and drove up inflation. The York area was hit particularly hard, and most construction activities stopped. During this time, the Kinsley boys were growing and found themselves in their own projects at the shop and around the farm. The company continued to expand its services, its workforce, and its geographic footprint.
Well, in the younger years, when we were teenagers, I mean, the business was primarily a excavation concrete business.
Didn't really start doing buildings until, say, late 70s, early 80s. So I think part of it was wanting to get out there the brand that, hey, we're more than just a site contractor. We're a general contractor and we do buildings. So I think that's when the building became a bigger influence.
So he basically took the men that he had in the construction company and he started to build buildings on the properties that Mom and Dad had, and they would lease them out. And I think that turning point in the late 70s, early 80s is when the building side of Kinsley Construction really took off, because he found an opportunity in a recession to build stuff and release it, which I think is the beginning of the flourishing of Kinsley Properties.
The Kinsley boys were given little choice on college, as Bob and Ann were very keen on their 5 sons furthering their education. Being raised on the farm and around construction projects, the boys worked in the business on the weekends and most summers. They were taught the fundamentals of construction by some of the best in the business, and often general business practices by their mother and father.
Well, he highly encouraged us, right? And it was his expectations that we would, I think as every parent, you always want your kid to have a better life than you have, and he saw, he valued education, he valued all that.
I'm sure Bob was always hopeful that they would do what they finally did, but I don't think it was ever required. It was they needed to go to college.
But what was been amazing for us growing up is that everyone who worked in the businesses also felt like family and also felt responsibility to raise us.
Each boy went their own separate path with no set plan to return to the family business. But destiny always finds a way. As the boys were leaving the farm, Bob continued to build the family business into a regional powerhouse and became a full-fledged general contractor. With more than $8 million in revenue, Bob expanded the company's geographic footprint into new territories and began testing out new services, such as steel fabrication and electrical work.
We evolved into our different roles. John was basically running the construction company in terms of estimating, project management. Chris was running the field. He was operations. Tim was real estate, and Rob and I would design. So when we get a project, Dad or Tim would bring it in through marketing, and they would be working on the real estate part of it, finding the land. John would be doing all the pricing, and he'd be managing kind of the design of the project, and Rob and I would be doing the design and permitting of the project. And then Chris would build it.
The return of the Kinsley boys, each one contributing his own unique experience and skill set to the various business components, was a true statement to the saying, "The whole is greater than the sum of its parts." Bob, as capable as he was, could only take the business so far on his own.
I think mostly just having our sons one by one find their way into it and choose it, not be asked to do it, but chose to do it, to work with their dad. So I'm proud of that.
While the Kinsley boys were reaching adulthood, the company had become a major force in the region's construction industry. Annual revenues were exceeding $80 million, and by the mid-1990s, the second generation of Kinsleys, John and Chris, began to take on leadership roles in the construction company.
John was very involved in what I'll call the office part of the operations, estimating and project management. Chris was very involved in what I'll call the field side of the business, operations, actual project management, field operations.
Well, obviously I started in the field. I've always been an operations guy, so I think I have always brought to the table the voice for the field guys or gals. Obviously my role over time in the last 40 years has evolved. Obviously when I was 25 and I went into construction, I wanted to change the world, right? I wanted to be better and do it different because I didn't want to do it the same old way, or I wanted to make my mark.
They each had their separate areas, but they all complemented and supported each other. And I think that's part of the success, that they found their niche that suited their personality and their skills. And that's why it worked.
Bob and Ann Kinsley were proud to see their children carry on the family business. They were also pleased to have the opportunity to devote more time to their personal interests, such as philanthropy, environmentalism, and growing the construction industry workforce.
I think it was 1997 is probably where we exploded. And I think that era of explosion and a little bit of a recession in the 2000s is where we realized in order to continue the success, we have to grow our people. Almost all of those kids or workforce that we got up to the 2000s, most of those employees had some farming background at the time. Where the demise of the farms and the labor force that we used to get happened, I'm not sure, but in the 2000s, my dad had a vision that if we don't make our people, we're never going to succeed. The farm kids aren't here anymore. We can't find them. And he had a vision to train our workforce. And that was when the school inception started. And it had a great vision. It was to create carpenters and concrete finishers and whatever trade we felt needed.
By 2003, Kinsley Construction had taken its place among the nation's top contractors. With over 1,000 employees on the payroll, John as president, and Chris as vice president of operations, the company restructured into separate divisions, including building construction, heavy highway and bridge, manufacturing, industrial, site, materials, and properties. The new divisions were led by the brothers, each of whom had their own unique set of responsibilities.
What developed as we've all started entering our lives in the business and building our careers is Dad realized that we needed our own sandbox. You know, every one of us, we wanted to get along, had to have our own sandbox to play in, and he allowed us to have the freedom to play and it gave us enough rope to make mistakes, but not hang ourselves.
It allows each one to focus on what their strengths are, but at the same time, I think still keeping them all connected, you're not out on your own in a division. You can still rely on the other divisions and their expertise when you need it, but yet each one's able to be efficient, operating kind of somewhat independently.
At that point, it's running all cylinders. I mean, we were growing, we were conquering the world.
By its 50-year anniversary, Kinsley Construction had become a high-performing, well-respected family company. And that was all before the third generations of Kinsleys came of age and made their own way into the business.
I think that, like the 5 sons, the majority of the G3s had their own interests and developed their own paths. A few of them, such as Andrew, James, Bobby, you know, they worked in the construction business in the summer times, just like we did.
I started at the bottom with a shovel and down in a ditch because it helped me gain the respect for the job. I learned it all the way up through.
Eventually ended up in the field doing labor, carpentry work with our apprentices in the Kinsley Education Center.
We've been very lucky as a family that we've stayed pretty close-knit through 3 generations. You know, the 3rd generation largely lived very close to each other. They've grown up very close to us. They've also had the opportunity to grow up in the business, watch what we do as we've grown the company. And it's incredible to watch them now have that opportunity to move forward and say they want to take the next step and see where they can take it.
Bob Kinsley remained CEO during this time and was still very active in the company's day-to-day operations. Kinsley Construction transformed the landscape and economy of York County and beyond. Bob and Ann built a company that stood the test of time, thanks to their hard work, dedication, and commitment to excellence. As they got older, they slowed down a bit so they could enjoy many of the things they didn't have time for before, but they never stopped working, and they continued to guide the company with wisdom and foresight.
My dad was heavily involved in the business, whether he was around, but you know, Dad was at that point trying to stay 5 years ahead of us. And
my mom and dad led by example, and they set a pretty high standard. And I am just so proud that they started this and gave us those values and gave us that drive.
I think it's just a continuation of what the G2s have always done through their careers, where they were always evolving in their career and always stepped up and filled the need when it was there.
John and Chris Kinsley followed in their parents' footsteps, and they built on the Kinsley legacy. In 2017, the Properties Division branched off into a separate company, with Tim Kinsley becoming president. Sadly, Bob passed away in 2020. He was a pillar of the community, and his loss was deeply felt. But his legacy lives on through his family, his employees, and the company he built.
We almost didn't believe it because he didn't act like he wasn't doing well. He would ride his bike, he would still ride his horses. His doctors would tell him he wasn't allowed to ride his horses, but you'd see him out riding his horse, and he wasn't gonna let anything stop him.
So he wasn't going to slow down until he absolutely could not move.
In some ways, it's nice that the memories that I have of him are still him, go, go, go. That didn't stop. He was that way up until the very end.
He was the patriarch. He built the business. I think we've shown over the last 2 or 3 years that, no matter what is thrown at us, we usually don't falter. We've always had enough foresight to have A plan, B plan, and C plan, no matter what it is. I don't think we build it with one person, right? We've instilled the fact that it takes a team or an army to succeed at what we're doing. And I think we have so many good, dedicated leaders that one hiccup doesn't crumble the enterprise.
What we really lost was just that presence and the values and the character that he just exuded it. He had a charisma. He just had a character. He was just a person that you wanted to be around, and we lost him.
Afterwards, it wasn't, the hardest part was not really being able to mourn his passing. It was because we had to figure out what we were going to do, because our leader's gone. It was hard because I don't think the brothers at the time gave themselves the opportunity to mourn, because they all had to pick up the pieces and figure things out. And it's sad, but we all knew something was bigger than sitting around and mourning. We had a lot of people that depended on us, and it was our responsibility to continue growing what he built, and it kind of empowered you also. It was, as much as it was sad, it was empowering we gotta do it for him.
By the end of 2021, Kinsley's steel fabrication and erection division had grown significantly, like others before it. Producing over 60,000 tons of steel annually, it was decided to transition the steel division into a standalone company as Kinsley Steel. With this transition, John Kinsley stepped down from his role as president and CEO and passed the torch to his brother Chris.
Dad and John were always a good team together. John started putting his effort into Kinsley Steel and Kinsley Enterprise and all those type of things, and Dad just kind of had to take the bull by the horns and figure it out. And he did a great job. I mean, it's going extremely well with him at the helm.
And Chris, even now, reflects constantly the way Bob did things, and he really tries to make sure that things are done the way his dad would have done them.
Chris's ability to step up and take over and lead the construction company has been amazing. He's managed to take the company in new directions, to figure out how to get it to focus on its roots, and how to be successful at what we know the construction company can do.
It takes dedication, it takes compassion, it takes a willingness to want to succeed, and it takes hard work. But probably all in all, it takes a lot of compromise.
Just 3 years after the loss of Bob Kinsley, tragically and unexpectedly, 2 of his sons, John and Tim, passed as well. The Kinsley family has been a long-standing pillar in the York community, and their loss was deeply felt.
Clearly, the loss of John and Tim has left a huge hole, both in the family and in the business. But what I would say is that all the skills and values that our parents gave us has given us the tools to try to find our way through it.
It's never been an option to not be okay. That's all I can say, is that we will not fail. We will not let this get away from us, and we will pick up the pieces and keep moving. Losing is not an option, and giving up is not an option. So whatever we have to do, we will keep this thing going and growing without their presence. And it's unfortunate that, you know, they're not here to see the future of this organization, but everything they've instilled in us also and been a part of is something we're going to be able to hold on to and try and make them proud.
We're never going to be able to fill their shoes, but I think we've learned to be adaptive enough to figure out how to make it work.
Though their lives were cut short, the legacy will live on through the company they helped build and through the people they touched with their generosity and kind-heartedness. As we look forward to the next 60 years, we look to the next generation of Kinsleys leading the way.
The way Dad and John worked together was like perfect. John had the one side of things, and Dad was more the bull to get it done, and I kind of see that with James and I.
James is more methodical, like Pat. He's very driven by details and thought process. Andrew is more of a by the gut. And today, those 2 kids have grabbed a hold of the reins, which I never thought they would, the way they have today. But I think they both complement themselves very, very well.
I definitely feel like Andrew and I are stepping up into these positions. Obviously, you know, our careers are accelerating very fast, especially given the changes in the family and the changes in the business. We've needed to kind of take on more responsibility quicker than we would have otherwise. But that's part of what it is to be in this family business, and our responsibility is to continue to be stewards of it. But we rely on the people that we've been working with since we started that have been trying to teach us. Just because our positions in the company change, our relationships with those people don't change. We're still learning from the people that have things to teach us, and we're trying to guide and steward the business when we can.
As you grow in generations, you weren't all raised by the same parents. Everybody has different values, and that's fine. But we also have to remember the Kinsley way and the Kinsley values, and we just try and instill that with just always having the conversations and remembering Grandpa and remembering Grandma and the uncles and everything that they've put into this to continue it, you know. I think we're well past even the thought of it ever not working. You know, that's not even an option at this point.
The way I see the future of Kinsley Construction is just to continue growing. The markets we serve, the regions that we serve, but at the same time not losing touch with our roots.
I'm most proud of the vision my dad had, and I'm most proud of the fact that the current family members, whether it's G2 or G3, have stepped up to the plate and have embraced that vision he had, right? And probably the vision of be bigger. going forward?
I feel perfectly confident. I think they worked with him and were exposed to his values over the years. And they often even will say now, when they're making a decision, they think, what would Dad do? They all say that. I feel like it's in very good hands, and with the G3s, as we call them now, coming into it and assuming their leadership positions and seemingly being successful at what they're doing, I think the future looks good.
No matter how much we grow, we still want to keep that family feel. We want people, when they join the company, to truly feel like they're joining the Kinsley family. And if we can keep that atmosphere and still grow, I mean, that would be success.
I remember growing up and it still was a small shop, and I remember the old offices, the old wash bay, and just watching everything progress has been awesome, because it means we're doing it right. It means we're expanding for the future. We're continuing Grandpa's legacy of wanting to grow and always provide people with opportunities to grow. It's definitely a challenge. It's crazy to see what it came from, but I can't only imagine what it would be like in 60 more years.